This video is all about joints. I'll discuss how they work, how you can protect them, what exercise is best for them, and I'll also take a look at the research to see if supplements actually work. Welcome, my name is Marika, and I'm the physiotherapist at sportsinjuryphysio.com. If this is your first time here and you would like to learn how to stay injury-free, make sure to subscribe and hit the little bell so that you don't miss any of the updates. Good, so tonight's session is all about joints. What are they? I'm going to look at quite a few different points with regards to joints. So I've made a list. So if you see me looking out into the distance, it's just to make sure that I don't miss anything. So first of all, I'll look at how the joints in the body is formed and what they like and how they work. Then I will look at why movement's important for joints and what type of movement. And I will also look at the effect of stronger muscles on joint, how that can help them. Then we'll look at what exercise is best for joints and how often you should do that. We will also look at how what you do as a child can affect your joints when you're older. The big question, does weight or being overweight affect your joints? We'll look at that. We'll also cover whether running is bad for your joints. Everybody, or a lot of my patients always say, oh, they don't know about the impact of running. So I thought that's something worthwhile looking at. And I'll also look at other sports that may have been indicated as being not so great for certain joints. Then lastly, we'll have a look at nutrition and whether any of the supplements that people take for joints specifically is actually useful and what the evidence says. And then I'll also just explain a little bit about genetics at the end of it to bring it all together. Okay, so let's start with what are joints. Our joints are, well, we've got a few different types of joints in the body, but I'm going to talk about synovial joints mostly because most of our joints are synovial joints. And what that means is that they are formed by two bones coming together, and the bones are covered in cartilage, which is really, really slippery. I remember as a student reading something about there's a slippery, or well, I'm going to call it a slippery index, but basically how slippery surfaces are. And things like ice and things are all graded according to this index. And apparently your joint surfaces, when they're pristine, is more slippery than steel when it's wet. So you can see how that's going to prevent friction when they move. Now, so you've got the two bones together, then you've got them covered in cartilage. They have a space in between them. They're not on top of each other. There's a bit of a joint space between them, and that joint space is filled with synovial fluid, which is kind of like an oil for the joint, but it's also where the joint gets all its nutrients from. Then the joint is surrounded by a strong capsule that binds the two bits of bone together. And this capsule is made of the same stuff as your ligaments. It's the white stuff in meat when you eat meat and it gets that sinewy stuff that you don't want to eat. That's it. So those are that's the joint capsule, and then around that you get all the ligaments and the muscles that surround it as well. So the important thing to realize is that joints don't have arteries going into them. Even the cartilage that covers the joint surface doesn't have arteries going into it. So it relies on changes in pressure to force the joint fluid or nutrients in and out of the joint and in and out of the cartilage. So if you're not moving your joint enough, you're not actually getting enough nutrients into that joint. So that brings us to why movement is important. Now, if we move the joint through the full range, you're getting in certain parts of the range, the joint is in a loose packed position where there's not a lot of strain on the surfaces, and in other parts it's really close packed or compressed where you get more strain on the joint surfaces. And that's not a bad thing. It needs that to get the nutrients in and out of the cartilage as well. The problem comes in if you just strain it all the time and don't give it any release. So a good example of this is take the hip joint, for instance. If you sit for great periods of the day, one, you don't get a lot of movement through there, so already it's not getting all the nutrients it should get. But also, there are certain parts of the joint that's being compressed most of the day then. That's not actually getting any of the synovial fluid, so it's also not getting its nutrients. So you can see why it's important that you really get movement throughout the day to keep your joints nice and strong and well fed. Now, the second important thing for joints is that they are not meant to take all the force when we move. The muscles around them are meant to absorb a lot of the force. Again, the hip joint, about 60% of the force generated through running and walking is meant to be absorbed through the muscles around the hip. So you can see how when your hip muscles aren't strong enough, they're actually not going to absorb the force, and your hip joint's going to take more force, causing it to be injured. Same thing goes for the knee joints. In all of my patients with knee pain, if we can find a gentle way to start strengthening their quadricep muscles, so the big thigh muscles, they usually see an improvement in their function as well as their pain, because the knee joints themselves don't have to take the strain. Now that can be tricky. I need to make a note actually, because I remember now somebody asked me about knee pain while cycling, and I need to chat to you about that at the end. So let me just make an X on my hand and hopefully I'll remember. So sometimes strengthening the muscles when you've got sore joints can be really tricky, but the main thing is that you start with something that's easy and really easy, that doesn't cause extra pain, and you build on that. So what exercise is the most important for joints then? Well, you've got to have a combination of the two. You've got to have exercise that cause a lot of movement so you can get fluid in and out of the joints, but you also need exercises that strengthen the muscles so that they can help absorb the force. So examples for exercises that gives you a lot of movement but not that much impact is cycling, for instance, for the hips, as well as, to be honest, the very lower back and the knees and the ankle joints. Swimming is a great one for the whole body because you've got the whole upper body as well as the back involved with that. A rowing machine could work. Cross trainer is a good one because there's low impact there. Of course, you'll get benefit from running and other sports like that as well. It's just that if you have joints that's already a little bit unhappy with life, impact sports may not be the greatest place to start. So yes, if you are on the cusp of, or if you're worried about your joints, that you think you have joints that's giving you trouble already, I would go for a lower impact sport to start with. So either cross trainer, cycling, swimming, rowing machine, if that works for you. And after you've built up the strength in your muscles and built up the strength in your joints, can you go into slightly higher impact sport then? If we're looking at strengthening exercises, then again, you're going to need a period where whenever you take strength training up, you need a period where you have adaptation, where you first get your body used to strength training. So that's usually, depending on how unfit you are, it can be a period between 4 to 12 weeks even, where you go for really low weights, but rather more repetitions of that. And I often, if somebody is new to strength training, I actually get them to do things with body weight first, and only once they can do everything properly with their own body weight do I then add strength in. Sometimes, if you have aches and pains in certain places, you may not even be able to do things with body weight. So that's when a gym can be quite useful, because if you use the machines, you can set it for much lower than body weight, and you can really start with gradually increasing the weight and the strength in the muscles. I've not found anybody who couldn't do strength training. It's more often just that they've got to find the right exercise and start with the right intensity to get the right effect. Okay, so to recap so far, our joints don't have arteries going into them. They need movement to get the fluid in and out, to get fed, and they need strong muscles around them to protect them when we move. So strength training as well as training, aerobic training, where you get a lot of movement but without impact, is important. Now, how can what you do in childhood actually affect your joints later on in life? Well, there are two ways that it can affect it. The first is children are actually not as robust as people seem to think. I often come across the attitude that kids just bounce back. You can basically throw anything at them, they can just keep going, and if they have a little nap, they should be fine. But that's really not the case. Kids still have really soft bones. So, for instance, they often don't fracture bones. They get what we call a green stick fracture, where the bone actually bends rather than properly break. So what that means is if they have a lot of high impact sport early in life, and especially during the growing years, they tend to actually change the shape of their bones sometimes and their joints to cause them problems later in life. So there's a large study that's come out from Southampton Football Club where they've looked at the MRI scanned a large sample of boys. I can't remember now the exact sample, but I'll write it in a blog post. And they looked at the shape of their hips throughout the growing years, and they correlated that with how much football these kids were playing. And they found that the ones who were competing at a higher level and more intense football training for longer periods during the week had a higher percentage of kids where their hips actually changed into the shape that we know causes more trouble later in life and early osteoarthritis. And they reckon it's because the bones are so soft that the high volume of twisting and impact actually causes them to change shape. So I can't really make this point any clearer that if you're a parent of a child who's gifted in sport, it doesn't mean that they should be doing sport all day long, all week long. They do need rest periods. The other place, so I get it, it's hard sometimes because especially with the football kids, it's often not the parents who push them, it's the kids who like playing football. So that's when you've got to be really sensible and just monitor. They can't play for the school as well as the club as well as another club and then play at home with their mates as well. That's too much during the growing years. Then the other sport that I see where parents often encourage kids to do more and more and more because they want them to be good at an early age is tennis. Now again with tennis there's a lot of repetitive backwards movements and quite high impact, and to be honest that's not great for a child either if they're doing too many hours in a week. So yes, if you have kids, just think a little bit about how much sport they do and whether it's repetitive and really high impact all the time. Good, so where's my list? Now, the other thing that people always worry about is whether being overweight can affect your joints. Now, unfortunately, the research do suggest that it can. And again, I've just realized I've missed one out for the kids. I said there's two reasons why the kids, what you do in childhood can affect you later in life. So the one is high impact sport too much change the shape of the bones, and the other is if you get bad injuries, joint injuries and things in early life, that can actually also cause you osteoarthritis later in life in those joints. So again, it's about thinking about the type of sports your kids do and are they actually strong enough for those sports? And when it comes to things like rugby, are they big enough for the position they're being played in? Luckily these days, the coaches as well as the schools are quite good at not pushing kids into rugby matches where they're not the right size for the position they're playing in. Okay, so back to weight. How can weight gain affect your joints? Firstly, the obvious reason is that, especially for the hips and knees and feet and ankles, it's a lot of extra impact on those joints. So they do wear out. And often also, it forces them into positions where they keep on taking the strain on the certain places in those joints. Secondly, if you're overweight, and especially if you carry a lot of weight around your belly, we know that that secretes hormones that actually causes chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation affects your joints and causes them to degrade. So if you do find that you're overweight, and especially if you carry weight around your middle, it may be worth losing a few pounds. Then, is running bad for your hips or for your legs or your knees? Well, you'll be happy to know that a very large research study came out recently where they looked at all the research around runners and joint troubles in knees and lower legs. And they found that actually running is protective from knee pain. And they think that it is because you end up with stronger muscles. Interestingly though, there are other sports that or involves running that's not good for your joints, like for instance football. Football's been shown to cause arthritis in the hips as well as the knees. But with football, you've got a lot of changing of direction and a lot of impact with that. And that may be the key, where running is just running in a straight line. If you're going to put in a lot of high level rotation and contact with that, then it may actually be bad for your joints. again, all of this should be taken into context of how much you do of it. So if you play football once or twice a week, I would argue that the benefits you get from the fitness, your cardiovascular fitness and strength you get from that may outweigh the dangers of it. So don't just go all football is bad. Just think about how much you do and whether you're actually strong enough for it. And then, of course, things like footwear can have a big impact. So if you're a heavy person, and I'm not even talking of an overweight person, just a big bloke, or like I am, I'm quite tall for my and quite heavy built for a female. Think about the shoes you wear. So I find I've got to have quite cushioned shoes because of my really hard orthotics I use, and I'm a heel striker most of the time. So as soon as the spring in my shoes go, I get heel pain and sometimes some knee pain as well. So if you're getting aches and pains in your legs and you tend to wear quite thin-soled shoes or not very shock-absorbent shoes, try switching that up and just see what the difference or if it makes a difference. Okay, so lastly, what about supplements? Well, I tell a lie, there's another bit after that. So when I looked at supplements, you can spend all day on the internet because there are so many different things with different claims. So I found a research study that looked at the main things that has been researched. So I thought I'd stick to them. So the first supplement that a lot of my patients ask me about is chondroitin and glucosamine supplements. They are the essential building blocks of cartilage, and the idea is that if you supplement with them, they are freely available, and it's been shown that they are actually available in your joints, then it does reach where it should go. So the idea is that that can help your joints recover from osteoarthritis or prevent osteoarthritis. Now, unfortunately, the research isn't too clear on that. There are studies that shows that it does help, but if you go and look at the sponsorship of the study, then it's actually been sponsored by the drugs companies. So I would worry about putting all my trust in those studies. The reviews that I found that came from independent sources didn't actually show that much of a benefit. So I would say it's one of those things where I'm not sure we can trust the research on that yet, because it looks as if the big pharma companies are actually paying for the research. So if you're thinking about using it, what I would say is maybe map your pain scale out of 10 for a month, and so you can get an idea of how your pain normally varies, and then start taking the supplements for 4 to 6 weeks and see if your pain varies in a different way, because the nature of painful joints is that they're not just painful all the time. They do have highs and lows. So don't be fooled that a supplement is working and then it's actually just you're in a normal low and you've actually done everything else right for it at that point. So just be a bit critical when you use these things. Then I looked at natural things. So for instance, ginger. Now ginger has some evidence out there to show that it can help decrease pain a little bit. But again, it's not massively. So I would say I would probably not take ginger as a supplement. I would rather incorporate ginger into my food. Same goes for turmeric. There is definitely some evidence to show that turmeric helps for inflammation and decreases chronic inflammation. But again, there's no evidence that you have to take it in big doses. So think about having it maybe in your curry, or having more foods where you just put some of it in. What I've learned in the past with things like vitamin C supplements and sport and stuff like that, they always go, ooh, it's got a good effect, so more must be better. And then when they test it properly, they show that, oh no, if you take too much of this, it actually has a bad effect. Now, I haven't found any research to show that too much turmeric can be bad for you. But what the other research has shown is that normally the way that you would normally use it in food is usually enough to get the benefit from it, that you don't need to take it as supplements. Then the other thing that was interesting was green tea. Out of all the things, green tea probably has some of the strongest research behind it to show that it's got anti-inflammatory properties. So that's something that I would consider having a cup of green tea per day. But again, they've shown in the research that green tea can vary in how effective it is depending on the quality of the green tea. So it's probably worth getting a slightly more expensive or a better quality green tea if you are going to use it. And then just vitamins in general. So they looked at things like vitamin B, vitamin K, vitamin A, vitamin D even. And all of these things have positive effects on joints. So what this comes down to is if you're having a good diet where you're getting a lot of your fruit and veg in there, you're getting green leafy vegetables, you're getting your berries with their purple skins because that's where the goodness sits. If you're having a good balanced diet, then you're getting all the nutrients that will help your joints. The big thing that's been shown to have a negative effect is sugar. And that has now been it was interesting when I came across it in the osteoarthritis research, because it's also been shown to have quite a negative effect on diabetes, on heart disease, because it causes everything, because it causes chronic inflammation in the body. So if you want, before you start spending money on supplements, I would rather go and evaluate your diet and check how much sugar am I getting in my diet, and where can I cut down on that, because that will likely do you more good than anything else. And alcohol, yes, fine. Red wine has been shown to have some anti-inflammatory properties, but it's definitely within limits. If you have too much alcohol, and if you have other types of alcohol, that also causes chronic inflammation, which again affects joints and all other parts of the body. So once again, it's better to go and look at what are the bad things that I can cut out, rather than taking supplements on top of the bad stuff. Then lastly, what I found interesting was, and this is now for osteoarthritis specifically, that it's quite obvious when you chat to people that osteoarthritis runs in families. But the interesting bit was that researchers haven't consistently been able to find a gene that causes osteoarthritis. So what they're starting to think is that it's down to epigenetics. Now, epigenetics is where we all have our DNA, which doesn't change. But on that DNA, certain genes can be turned on or off. And epigenetics is that little switch being turned on or off without changing your DNA. So what they find is that in certain families, they have these genes, but they're just not turned on. If they get turned on, then they cause osteoarthritis. And they're seeing that things that can turn it on are things like diet, so having a high sugar diet or having the wrong things in there, not getting the nutrients. So for instance, if you are one of those people who, and I know a lot of South African men especially, only tend to eat rice, potatoes and meat. Now, how many vitamins do you think you get in rice, potatoes and meat? If you're one of those people who really have a limited repertoire to your diet, then you may actually be switching your genes on in a way that you're going to get osteoarthritis because you're not getting all the right things in there. So if you have people in the family with osteoarthritis, don't think that that has to be your the route that you're going to take. You can do a lot of things to help your joints by keeping them moving, making the muscles stronger, and watching your diet. Thank you for watching. If you would like to learn more about preventing sports injuries, make sure you hit the subscribe button. See you next time.